Good morning, everyone, and good evening if you're joining from a different time zone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Qing Gao. I'm a professor at the Columbia University School of Social Work and the director of the Columbia China Center for Social Policy. Welcome to the second lecture this semester in our annual lecture series on Chinese social policy from comparative perspectives. This lecture series is co-sponsored by the Columbia China Center for Social Policy and the Weatherhead East Asian Institute, and supported by the Columbia School of Social Work. Before we start, I want to say that we're using Zoom webinar for this and all the other lectures. The speakers will present for about 40 to 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A with the audience members. If you have a question for the speakers, please enter it into the Q&A box anytime during the lecture, not to the chat box. If you have reflections or comments, feel free to enter them into the chat box. I want to remind everybody to be respectful to the speaker and other audience members in your comments. Now I introduce our two distinguished speakers today, Jenny Chen and Mark Selden. They are going to present on their new book, Dying for an iPhone. Not a great picture, but you can see it. I think you will see from their presentation slides. Jenny Chen is an assistant professor of sociology at Hong Kong Polytechnic University and co-author with Mark Selden and Peng Nai of this new book. She also serves as a management committee member of the university's China Research and Development Network and is a vice president of the International Sociological Association's Research Committee on Labor Movements. Mark Selden, my friend, is a senior research associate in the East Asia program at Cornell University and also at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute at Columbia. He's the editor of the Asia Pacific Journal and a number of book series at different publishers. His work throughout his career has examined many different topics, including modern and contemporary geopolitics, political economy, history, and societies of China, Japan, Korea, and the Asia Pacific. His achievements are too many to cover today, but I'm so excited he brought to my attention this wonderful new book, which they started researching over 10 years ago. I read the book. It's such an inspiration and reminder of our role and responsibilities as social scientists, what we can do, what we should do, and what we, when we come together, can help the society to achieve better outcomes. So now I turn it over to Professor Chen, who will do the presentation, and Mark, Professor Selden, feel free to jump in anytime. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Gao. Thank you so much. And your full team of colleagues. I feel my great honor and pleasure to join you, Columbia University, as well as my mentor and co-author, Professor Selden, as well as Peng Nai and many other researchers from Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, and all over the world. Without these collaborative efforts, I don't think we will be able to carry on for the past 10 years. But tonight, what a special opportunity to share some findings and discoveries. So now let me share from my screen. We are going to have the full slide. Okay. Right. Can you see clearly? Let me also minimize some of our icons from my side. Okay, so thanks once more. The colleagues from Columbia University have great communications, and we are able to join you tonight with our technologies. Maybe some of the items are actually produced and assembled in China by Foxconn. So this is a book talk, and I'm so glad that my mentor, Mark, is joining. What we are going to do is to give a summary about the following. We want to put our research into the context of labor, the Chinese state, and global capitalism. And we will have more time to focus on those who are behind the label made in China. And they are the second or new generation of rural migrant workers. What is more hidden from our mainstream discussion as the large group of student interns. So they are the students from vocational schools, but who are doing internship in Foxconn. After presenting our main findings and the evidence, I would really encourage everyone to think about the alternative, what might be a more sustainable future that we are envisioning. Just like Professor Gao mentions, maybe we are playing a significant role and to reflect on our own responsibility and power to make a better future. So I'm really looking forward to learn from all of you. Our title, Dying for an iPhone, it has a double meaning. It refers to a new generation of Chinese workers who are struggling to make our iPhones, while consumers around the group are queuing up to buy the latest models. We are trying to combine production and consumption to attempt to make a link to reflect on the tragedies. These are the worker suicides. 10 years ago in 2010, 18 workers, they attempted suicide at Foxconn factories in China. 14 died. Only 4 survived, but with crippling injuries. They were young, between 17 and 25 years old, or were the rural migrants. They are from the countryside and work in the city in Foxconn. Instead of finding out the root causes for the tragedies, for suicides, Foxconn management installed the safety nets all over. The dormitories, the factories, are these anti-suicide nets could really catch the jumpers and save lives? As we dig deeper, we find many social media discussions. Here is one of the worker blog. The text we translate here, the use of death is simply to testify that we were ever alive at all, and that while we lived, we had only despair. It's a sense of hopelessness and desperation. But the use of death should never be a means to show that they had lived at all in this world. We did get in touch with one survivor. She was 17 years old, had been working in the business group called IDPBG, Integrated Digital Product Business Group. It is one of the more than dozen of business groups within Foxconn, and they are always competing, racing against time to enhance productivity as well as to minimize the cost. So all this competition really shape how the production are organized on the shop floor. She is the one who had been assembling Apple products, but after working for a month, she couldn't get any pay due to the administrative problems at Foxconn. After 12 days, she regained consciousness, but only to find that she was paralyzed from the waist down. Her seemingly useless body was flown back to where she was from, and it is a small village in the central China in Hubei. What a coincidence, actually also from Wuhan, from the city where you have heard about the pandemic, but that is where somewhere more smaller village where she is from. From her own tragic experience, we understand that it might be just a small tip of a huge iceberg. From her own story, we are working very hard to think more about the rural-urban migration history. There are hundreds of millions of young migrants like her, female and male, who are looking for new opportunities in the city. It is the attractions of the global modern kind of consumption, but that is also a new hope to escape from poverty in China. Well, you might know there are still very or highly uneven developments across different regions in China. As today, our talk is more about Chinese social policies and tied to labor issues, let us quickly refresh ourselves about the first generation rural migrants. Based on opening and reforming, that is urban biased. It is the planning more focusing on big cities like Guangzhou, Shanghai City, Beijing. And for those cohorts in the 1980s or 90s, these first group of migrants, they were basically not well educated like you, the audience who are joining the webinar today. And they are labeled as the bride drift, as if they are bride, they are flowing anywhere without directions. But indeed, they are usually coming as social groups, right? They have their localistic networks. But in the city, they are discriminated and looked down as uncultured, backward, dirty, and they seem to make more crimes than any other local urban citizens. Today's decades have passed, but still you will find these younger, better educated workers, they are still looked down as the low-end population, or these low-end people as officially described. They are not welcome. They are sometimes erased in the discourse and practices of urbanization. So these are the disadvantages, men and women, and they are living in substandard housing in the basement in Beijing, in Shenzhen, in some other cities to provide the necessary labor power to build the high-end and smart global cities. So it is of these more new and younger generation that becomes our focus. Many of them are indeed working in the global Fortune 500 companies and what the challenges they are facing. So our analytical framework are basically three different dimensions. Well, they are also overlapped, but analytically we can distinguish the first group of literature that is focusing on export-oriented industrialization since the 1980s. We have seen the largest migration in China and reshaping the work and employment relations. And the second literature that is focusing on the global value chains. Despite the companies who have been talking about corporate social responsibility, they are concerned about new jobs and creation or development. But behind all this smoke, let us face the more fundamental issue, and that is the unbalanced power between the global buyers and the suppliers. So some more critical scholars will relabel global value chains as global poverty chains, focusing on the fact that they are the low-wage, low-skill workers who cannot even get the living wage. For those of you who are really interested about this literature, we can talk much more in depth. But in the following, we might indeed raise more about our findings based on these 10 years on and off field work in China. And we have to tie back all these more macro relationship and analysis into the context of the authoritarian regime. So we have to localize and think about what the role of the states to think about labor and capital tensions or conflicts, and how the state is trying to mediate, suppress, or respond to workers' demands. That is really the third dimension or the axis of our analysis. And this is a real collective effort far beyond the individual capacity of Mark, myself, or Punai. We have a whole team of dedicated researchers from 2010 to the outbreak of coronavirus in 2019. It was really the time that we have to wrap up the decade-long study. And it was indeed also a good timing for us to add voices to these workers. We have been engaging with them, and they have the very important voices to make through their poetries, songs, open letters, photos, or videos. And we ourselves had also done the meetings and correspondences with the managers and government officials. What we are trying to achieve is not to just look inside Foxconn, but there are two major goals. First, to assess the extent to which the Chinese government and these global transnational, multinational corporations like Apple fulfilled their responsibilities to protect workers in the context of global outsourcing and transnational manufacturing. So the second, and possibly more important, we are not just writing a book for the purpose of analysis, but that is a way to inspire, support, and concrete action to think about what the possible global labor struggles would look like in our digital age. All right, in the following, I will be really brief and quick. This is the official website of Foxconn to have a very brief introduction about the fact that Foxconn itself, even though their headquarters is based in Taipei, in Taiwan, a Taiwanese company, but indeed it is a global empire, a global enterprise. They have their major facilities in Brazil, Mexico, as well as in the US. We have been looking more in Foxconn, Wisconsin, right? And there have been also some important supply base in former Eastern European countries. But until today, China remains the center of Foxconn's profitability, and China represents as the biggest supply base of Foxconn. Foxconn's parent company is called Honghai Precision Company Limited. Until 2010, Foxconn was the only producer of iPhones and the first generation of our tablets, iPads. But at the same time, it is a very competitive supplier, a major contractor of Intel, Google, Amazon, and all the other favorite brands. What are you using right now to join our webinar? Is it a laptop by let's say Dell, or a MacBook Air? So our lives are no longer really being able to cut off from these mobile high-tech consumer products. And I believe your favorite equipments, most likely, at least one of them, would be produced by Foxconn. So Foxconn became the largest China's exporter since 2002, just following China's opening up and the participation into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And ever since, with the local government support, not only in the coastal area, but the interior and the southwestern part is all over with the provision of land and other administration benefits and preferential policies. Today, Foxconn already built more than 40 mega industrial parks all over, and that is creating a 24-hour continuous high-speed production chain that could maximize the advantages of vertical integration and flexible coordination. That is the secret, the key why Foxconn becomes so powerful as the biggest supplier in the whole world in terms of electronics products. So as you can see from the map across the border of Hong Kong, we then cross and get into Shenzhen. We began to conduct the interviews in the summer amid the wave of suicides. So in 2010, Foxconn, as I mentioned, here you can see this is a place where dormitories, swimming pool, factories, warehouses are all in one. It is a major factory town or a huge factory city. At one point of time, they have nearly half of a million workforce who are working and living here and working really day and night. based on our interviews, we know that the management system is a very typical hierarchical form. But when we look back to the 1950s and 60s, you would know under Chinese socialism, even though that is more an ideological goal or vision in terms of equal relations or equalitarian relations at work. And that is never the reality also. But relatively speaking, in those days, in the 50s or 60s, we have the cadres, we have workers or technicians who will be able to have their democratic planning or engaging in some decision-making processes. But nowadays, from the very top CEO, the layers of managers, directors, down to the bottom, we have the assembly line workers and the student interns who have almost no power, but only to obey and listen to all those commands. So we are not suggesting that Foxconn is the only one who are adopting a very military management style, very harsh, abusive, or exploitative. That is just one part of the story. From a wider angle, we have to know that Apple, who are really the one who are influencing how production should be organized. Apple and Foxconn, for example, they are two different entities. They are independent companies, but in fact, they are closely linked in product development, marketing, engineering, production, logistics, and sales. This also means that, in fact, what the priorities in terms of production, it is the very short period of time, the best quality, and there is no much room for that kind of corporate social responsibility codes or the guidelines to be realized. Because when it is the time to launch the new model in the market, everything is being put aside. And what is more alarming to us is the fact that Apple indeed hire their whole team of employees and station on site. That means there are Apple employees and the specialized managers who are out there, and they do know what's going on, but they just turn their eyes closed. While to the global community, they still claim that they are very committed to make sure everyone in their supply chain are treated with dignity and respect. Is that the case? What we want to argue is that this is a buyer-driven model. Apple is the one who pushed the prices to the lowest possible and to shorten the product delivery time. The high turnover really means a lot in the market. For Apple, is competing with Huawei technologies, Xiaomi, or some other brands like Samsung. It is time, it is money, and it then transfer the high pressure, the intense pressures on Foxconn workers. When we just start off to do our research 10 years ago, it was the iPhone Model 4 and the original iPad model. Nowadays, when you look at the TV ad, it's iPhone 12, iPhone 12 Pro, or iPhone 12 Mini. There are so many different models. Do we really need one new model every year? And what does it mean onto the workers? This is a pie chart that shows if an iPhone is selling at $100, Apple will get the lion's share of the profit, nearly 60%. And raw materials is only about 1/5. Those companies like LG or Samsung, they provide more sophisticated components, and they will also gain a lot more. And what you find is that Chinese workers, or by 2010, Foxconn workers, they get less than 2% in the value chain, the value created, but that is not being shared or distributed with workers. And this is another visual to just show you what does it mean on the shop floor. When the demand for iPhones becomes so strong, but at the low seasons, so not Christmas time or other important time in year, the fluctuations of the order, the very tight delivery requirements, this all transfer the pressure onto the workers. There are indeed two main points right here. First, compulsory overtime. When Foxconn has to meet the high volume order, you just can't do it overnight. And you're pushing the employees, including the students, to the limit to just do it. The second implication is that it doesn't really mean a good plan to keep a large and stable workforce throughout the whole year. And that is also the driving force behind when Foxconn turns to informal labor or further labor subcontracting, so that the flexible labor will come in and meet with the production quota. A worker says, I screw the screws without a break. And each screw turns diligently, but they can't turn around our future. Our life is work, work, and still keep working. There is no much time for them to hang out, to make boyfriends or girlfriends. This is another poetry that we would like to share. A screw fell to the ground. In this dark night of overtime, plunging vertically, lightly clinking, it won't attract anyone's attention, just like last time, on a night like this, when someone plunged to the ground. It is a metaphor. It recalls the very sad and tragic memories when someone threw himself or herself from the rooftop to the ground in the bright red blood. We connect with the very inconvenient truth that workers are still facing the high pressure at work, seeing no hope to move forward. And this is he, a 24-year-old worker who died, is not even survived with the crippling injury. So suicide is really involved an intensely personal and social struggle on the part of the individual, but it is also in a broader sense within the political economy. They leave home when they are so young, sharing the feelings of displacement and existential alienation. The city where they want to stay in, they cannot. And going back home, there is nothing for them to say a return. Things have been changing. Their aspiration, their hope is now placed in the city. For those young workers, they do not see much prospect in Foxconn. And how about those students who are even much younger than them? They are 16, 17, or 18 years old, still doing their studies in the vocational schools. But because of the demand for iPhone is so strong, Foxconn, with the local government's support and coordination, have been bringing in hundreds, thousands of interns during the high production season. And this is the phenomena which is much more hidden from the past labor studies. And this is the illegal and large scale abuses of the interns. During the summer of 2010 alone, Foxconn employed 150,000 interns. That is approximately about 15% of its million-strong Chinese workforce. These students, they are coming from car repair, healthcare, accounting, medicine, Chinese herbal medicine. No matter what, they are put onto the assembly line, making our iPhones or iPads or printers and other equipment without any skills training. Compulsory time, day and night, even though night shift for the sake of their health and well-being should not be allowed. But that has been going on 10 hours or 12 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. This is a kind of forced or unfree labor. Every day is just like a repetition of one or two simple motions like a robot. And walking on the line, living in the factory dormitories, they have to comply with the Foxconn internship programs, otherwise they won't be able to graduate. So you can see that it is in Henan province, Sichuan province, Guangzhou, everywhere. We see how the local education departments and bureaus, they have to identify with the technical and vocational schools to recruit the so-called student interns for Foxconn and Packagron and some other companies. This is a very institutionalized student labor system that are being uncovered. And you can see from this actually a mockery, a newspaper image. These young interns, they have no eyes to see. They have to blindly follow the order. They have no mouth to speak or complain. They only have ears to listen. So this is indeed a highly immoral or an educational crisis that we feel so amazed and alarmed to discover. While we have been talking about technological upgrading, vocational education in China, the technological and digital future, but their future is being ruined and destroyed in the day and night assembly jobs. Here is just another way to present how on the very top, Foxconn sets the student quota, and then the provinces, no matter Sichuan or Henan and some other places, they will got all sorts of campaigns and mobilization drive, and then finally the schools have to comply. So all these names are already published in the mainstream media or in terms of the Chinese and the companies' publications. That is why we also put out the names. Otherwise, we will protect everyone from being retaliated. But what you can see is already a very simplified visualization. In reality, it does involve many more cities, towns, and villages. And with the whole village and school cooperation, none of these educational institutes are actually getting away from the Foxconn drive. These interns are the cheap labor. They got paid. However, they do not have any pensions or industrial injury insurance or health care. They have none because under the Chinese law, they are classified as the students and they are not legally endorsed or recognized as an employee. So all these are telling you that in China, it is not just about the market power. It is also about how the local states are getting involved and shaping the labor regime. Because many local states are competing for investment, and Foxconn means a lot. It is the dragonhead. There have been the forced or involuntary transfer of workers and interns among different production sites. Remember, we have the map about the more than 40 mega factories all over China. So time and again, there have been the disputes and conflicts, and it ends up sometimes with the large scale or a small scale protests and strikes. It happened again and again that we document into one major chapter in the book. And one point that is very crucial is the fact that Foxconn indeed is a unionized workplace. So Foxconn does have a union, but the company union in nature, that means the company union chair is indeed the personal secretary of the CEO. Under these circumstances, how would workers or interns have the trust and confidence in the union? So this is another visual to show that the ACFTU, the only official union federation in China, that is part of the party state. And then at the workplace level, we have Foxconn Union, and neither the management nor the local governments would really want to see the organized labor effort or labor power. Independent trade unions are all illegal in China. If we just stop here, I'm giving a very, very depressing talk, but I also want to shed a new light of hope. Indeed, because these are the young workers who are sacrificing their youth and even educational opportunities to produce for the global consumers. There have been students and faculty members like you who are really concerned. And in Hong Kong, our group, the group of university students have been organizing the justice campaigns. There have been explosions, deaths and injuries that should be prevented. But all these occupational diseases, poisoning and injuries that happen again and again. And we have to do the media campaign and actions to get the right thing. We unfurl a huge banner outside the Apple retail store. It says no more iSlave, or to put the end to the iSlavery. And in Taiwan, we have our comrades, the unions, as well as academics, students, who ask what is the price of flesh and blood. When they die, and they die young, their dreams are shattered. So there have been all these ceremonies and actions that are putting pressure onto the company and their buyers. And in Mexico and some other places, they are also organizing some protest actions to show their solidarity support with their brothers and sisters in China. And in USA and in Europe, we also have your support, who have been organizing some boycotts or activities. These are no longer the iSlaves. They also stand up and fight back against Apple. Years after years, when the iPhone 10, the Model 10 was launched in the market, we again organized another big action in Hong Kong, get some media attention. But it sometimes is quite disappointing that the same message is still there is the high human cost embedded in the Apple product. And Apple is not alone, but Apple is the iconic, profitable company that we take aim at. So in China, what are the outcomes? There have been social support. Workers themselves are also having the agency or taking the role to protest and make their demand. The outcomes are both seemingly contradictory, but indeed they are parallel. On the one hand, the strikes have brought in greater repression. There have been the crackdown of the Maoist or Marxist university students, and need not to say is the NGOs, the labor groups, but there are also greater responsiveness. So the trade union, no matter what, they have to expand their membership to preempt or to prevent further unrest, because some legitimacy in the state is needed. And the maintenance of socio-political stability, that is also an important goal under President Xi Jinping's governance. So these worker leaders, they have been confronting the management and sometimes government officials with the backup of the police, the public security, and they will risk being detained, arrested, or even imprisoned. Sometimes it is a very brief detention, but sometimes it is really several years of imprisonment. So workers are taking high cost if they organize in such a high profile manner. These acts of resistance are usually very short-lived, and we do have our confidence that even though their actions have been put to the end abruptly, but the organizing experiences, the mobilizing tactics or strategy that are accumulating, and that is really valuable for them to articulate their collective demands. What we have done is the book, and the book it is meaning the trust in us, the families, the workers. So we have the relief when the book finally come out last year, but at the same time, we know that is far from enough to make the change. We need to document their life, their voices, to continue to stand with them, to fight for dignity and fundamental labor rights. We have set up a website. We also use some other techniques to do recording, to really hope that more attention, new strategies, and take a more sustainable change. So there have been the more exciting coalition or alliance between the university students and workers in China. Some of them are deeply studied or indeed immerse themselves into Marxism, feminism, and some other intellectual thoughts. We do know that because of the media surveillance and the tight control over education, it's becoming more and more difficult to sometimes even just organize some trainings or services for workers. But still, many attempts we are trying, and getting a stronger coalition between workers and students is definitely a way out. Social work students, sociology, history, and other disciplines, we come together and make everyone understand deeper about the logic of global capitalism or the role of the state, and try to discuss what are the alternatives that we are envisioning. So this is the wrapping up now. What we are trying is really to build a broader cross-class network. We unify the often separate struggles. Let's say workers and environmentalists, we can join hands together to organize the eco socialist movements, occupational safety, public hygiene, and community health and well-being. These are also important if there have been a very polluted factories right here. It is also killing the people in the nearby, in the local community. And these are not the separate spheres. And also, in terms of gender equality, there should be more respect in the workplace, no sexual harassment, no sexual abuses, and more structurally, we are really referring to the recombination of production and reproduction. Now, the daily reproduction, you sleep, you regain some energy to work. That is happening more or less in the factory dormitories or in the very low-cost, substandard living place. It is almost quite difficult for workers to bring together their parents or children or their wife or husband together. Are there a better way in terms of providing adequate healthcare, pension, and affordable housing in the city or wherever they want to get retired or continue to work? So these are also the important theme that we are reflecting on, and that is about production and social reproduction. And finally, it is beyond the work sphere. Politics or a more democratic form of planning, production, decision making, and how to share the value being created by the direct producers of workers. That is really the key to go forward. So a more pro-democratic society, a basic right to organize and associate. These are also the vision. Just one final news to share, and quite a joyful news. We had got the contract from Korean publisher. So there should be a translation that will be coming up soon. So thank you so much for everyone. Thanks for your attention. Now I will pass the time to Professor Gao and Professor Selden. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Chen, for a brilliant talk. I loved it. I was reflecting upon the different book chapters you had. And I urge everyone in the audience to read the book because there are chapters about every element that Professor Chen talked about: environmental crisis, the student interns, gender issues. I mean, there's just so much. And this is heart-wrenching, but at the same time, when I read the book, the poetry, the artwork, the struggles they shared are heartbreaking, but also inspiring, because you see the power and the life there. I invite Professor Selden to speak. If you could unmute yourself, and I invite all audience members to please enter your questions or comments or reflections into the Q&A box. Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Chin, and thanks so much, Jenny. I would just like to speak to 2 points briefly so we can get to questions and comments and discussion with our global audience, we hope. I want to talk a little bit more about one of the issues that Jenny has outlined very well already, and that is the student intern program. China has a remarkably comprehensive and in many ways very promising intern program. These are for vocational students and the regulations are impressive. Internship programs have to be in line with the subject of study of the particular students. They have to contribute to their educational development, even as they work and are paid a minimum wage in the factory. There are very careful regulations to protect students from abuse. And the unfortunate fact is that the reality, in fact, is very different. What we find is a tight nexus of power ranging from local government to Foxconn and Apple and other corporations. We've been talking a lot about Apple, but in fact, what our book is actually meant to draw your attention to is that Apple is simply the richest, the most profitable, and the leading of the companies in China, but everything in your pocket, whether it is Korean made or Japanese made or Chinese made, in fact, has passed through Foxconn in most cases. So what does this nexus of power look like? Well, the main point is the close collaboration between local government and Foxconn. As Jenny pointed out, there are tremendous incentives for local governments to ensure that Foxconn builds its factory in your jurisdiction and not somewhere else. The result of this is that local governments are assigning every school within their jurisdiction to come up with a fixed quota of interns to serve Foxconn. And the fact is that they fill those quotas. These are compulsory interns. These are not voluntary interns by the students. They are assigned, in other words, by the local state, which then arranges the logistics, getting them to the factory, and even assuring that a local teacher accompanies the intern groups to monitor the behavior for students who might think, well, they really would like to be out of there. So we have a situation in which the fundamental program of the internship is violated from day one. There is, in fact, no internship program in the cases that we have investigated. Rather, from day one, interns are put to work in the factory with no training, with a single task, a single mindless task, which is what they perform throughout their internship program, which often can last for a year or more. And it's in this sense, perhaps you feel that Jenny's expression, I slave, is a bit of an exaggeration, but this is the vintage I slave in terms of interns who don't wish to be interns and who are not interns in reality, but are lashed to the machine. So this is one point I want to make. The second one is the relationship between Apple and the programs that we've been describing. Apple somehow has succeeded in presenting itself as the golden boy of American corporations. We have principles. If there are violations, we will tell our counterparts in China or anywhere else that they have to shape up and fix these. But the reality is that nothing of the sort has been happening, least of all on the internship programs. And what our book shows, I think, is the ways in which those high-flown principles are systematically violated from day one, with the understanding of Apple and the other corporations that are involved. Indeed, it is precisely the pressures that Jenny was talking about from Apple to Foxconn, requiring hundreds of thousands of new models to appear by the date of the release or the holiday season or whatever, and the necessity for the company to meet those quotas, and it's therefore illegal use of intern labor. The other area in which this use is illegal is that, again, the Chinese state has very nice regulations. Young interns cannot work night shift. They can't work more than the 8-hour day. All of these, again, are systematically violated. So these are just a few other points I wanted to put on the table. We'd love to hear from you, have your comments and your thoughts on the labor management issues that we've tried to raise today. Thank you.
I urge those who have questions or reflections to reach out to the authors directly. You can also reach out to me and I will connect you. I want to thank you both for joining us. What an important book and an important talk. I want to thank all the audience members for staying with us, for being thoughtful and participating in the conversation. We hope to see you again in another event in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.